I used to work as a night clerk in a downtown condominium. The building had been put up in the late 1960s, and its design created endless security problems. Both levels of the garage were accessible from the street, meaning there were too many entry points, many hidden in blind spots the cameras couldn't cover. Because of that, part of my job was to make 2 full rounds of the building every night, checking every corner, every hallway, making sure no non-residents had slipped inside. Most nights the worst I dealt with was homeless people looking for shelter. I hated kicking them out, but it was policy. The creepiest place in the whole building was a strange, narrow corridor on the first floor of the garage. It sat directly under the ramp leading up to the second level. The hallway was only about 3 feet wide and maybe 30 feet long. At the end of it stood a massive water pipe with a valve. That was the only reason the space existed. But the unsettling part wasn't the pipe. It was the door. It could only be locked from the outside with a sliding bolt latch. There was no handle or keyhole inside. If someone shut the door while you were in there, you'd be trapped. Completely. Management already knew about it and didn't care, which meant I had to check it every night. I hated that duty. I'd open the door, shine my flashlight in, and move on. I never stepped inside. One night, about 3 in the morning, I was halfway through my shift when I heard a door slam somewhere in the garage. My stomach tightened. I followed the sound, and sure enough, the door to that dead-end hallway was standing wide open. I looked around, no one. I shouted, hoping to scare out anyone hiding. Silence. The place felt empty. Still, I didn't like it. I moved closer and aimed my flashlight into the hallway. Nobody was there. Just an empty glass bottle sitting about 10 feet inside. I sighed, annoyed. Probably someone had been drinking, heard me coming, and bolted. Still, I wasn't allowed to leave trash lying around, which meant I had to go in and grab it. Might get screamed not to, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Nobody was hiding in there. Nobody was going to lock the door on me. I took a breath and stepped inside. The second I picked up the bottle, the door slammed shut. I spun around and ran to it, but it was already locked. The bolt had been thrown from the outside. I pounded with both fists. I screamed. Nothing. The air felt thinner with every passing second. My flashlight beam jittered across the pipe at the end of the hall, and for a moment it looked like something else, something crawling toward me, until I forced myself to breathe. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The concrete walls and the metal door blocked everything. No calls. No messages. Nothing. I realized I was trapped until someone let me out. But it was 3 in the morning. Nobody would be coming for hours. While I sat in the dark, I started hearing noises outside. Car alarms blaring, then cutting off suddenly. Whoever had trapped me was out there, moving from car to car, smashing windows, silencing alarms, stealing whatever they wanted. I could do nothing but listen. I kept banging on the door every few minutes, but nobody came. After a while, I gave up and sat down against the wall, turning off my flashlight to save power. The minutes stretched into hours. Finally, maybe 2 hours later, I heard footsteps in the garage. A resident heading to work early. I banged until they heard me. They opened the bolt from outside and freed me. But the relief didn't last. Glass littered the parking lot. A dozen cars had been broken into, windows shattered, valuables gone. Tens of thousands of dollars in damage. The culprit was never caught. Not on camera, not on the streets. And I lost my job. Not that I'd ever want to go back there anyway. One summer during college, I decided not to take classes and picked up a night shift job at a small gas station right next to campus. I wanted to make some cash while I had the time. The manager hired me on the spot. A little odd, but I didn't question it. They put me on the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It wrecked my sleep schedule, but the job itself wasn't terrible. The first few hours could be busy, then everything would slow down until the small, weary morning rush around 5. Those slow hours were when I stocked shelves, cleaned, and tried to stay awake. Most nights were fine. Sometimes a sketchy stranger would wander in. Sometimes a drunk would be loud. Nothing I couldn't handle. Then, one Thursday night, everything changed. It was nearly 2 a.m. when a man walked in who gave me a bad feeling right away. Bald head, strange tattoos with symbols I hadn't seen before. The kind of guy who looks like trouble. He'd parked a dirty, lifted pickup in the handicap spot. When he came up to the register, he glared at me and started muttering things that sounded like slurs. I kept it professional and rang him up. He bought a single case of beer. Then I told him, as politely as I could, that the county law forbade alcohol sales between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. That set him off. He ranted about freedoms and stupid laws, then turned on me like I was the problem. I tried to explain I was just doing my job. He called me names and criticized me in front of the store. I asked him to leave. For a second, he softened, all buddy-buddy, and asked me to bend the rules just this once, since he'd been in early. Maybe he made a convincing point. Maybe I was tired. I caved. I sold him the beer. I shouldn't have. He came back out to his truck, cracked a can, and sat on the tailgate. A few minutes later, another truck pulled up. Then, an SUV. More men with shaved heads and tattoos climbed out. They parked in a loose ring around the store, smoking and drinking, all of them staring at me through the glass with those slow, smirking looks that felt like a dare. I realized pretty quick they weren't harmless. When the first man came back in, drunker, smug, triumphant, he walked up to the counter with a second case of beer. He looked at me and said something that made my skin crawl, something that read like a thread. He didn't want to disappoint his friends. My hands were shaking as I rang it up. He told me to keep the change like it was a tip. He left, and the others cheered. They'd been ripping open cans, tossing empties everywhere, kicking them across the lot. The lot was a mess. I felt trapped. If I refused them, if I tried to kick them out, they could gang up on me. They could come back later. I imagined the worst. I pictured the owner's wife who worked in the office, imagining what cruel things these men might do if they felt slighted. Fear made me hesitate. Finally, I locked the front door and went into the office to call 911. I told dispatch what was happening. A few minutes later, a cruiser rolled up, and an officer told the group to leave. There was shouting outside I couldn't make out. For a while, I was terrified it would escalate. But they left for that night. The cop waited until they were gone before driving off. I thought the ordeal was over. The next day, the owner showed up furious about the mess and yelled at me for ruining their little after-hours party. The store's liability and the threats weighed on me. I quit soon after. I couldn't stand the thought of being trapped behind that register if they came back. Even now, months later, I worry that one of them will recognize me around town. I don't know what they're capable of. All I know is this town has a lot of guys like that, loud, dangerous, and always looking for trouble. Years ago, I worked as a barista at a locally owned coffee shop that doubled as a small venue for local artists and musicians. It was the kind of place where there was always an open mic, poetry, or a guitar player in the corner. Back then, before 2020, the shop stayed open 24 hours a day from Thursday to Sunday. Most employees dreaded the overnight shift. The hours were easy, but the tips were awful. And the place, the only business still open for miles, could feel eerie and unsafe after midnight. I never liked being alone there. My biggest fear was always that someone would drag me into the back room and nobody would ever know. Because of that, I usually asked a friend to hang out with me overnight. The one who helped me the most was Nick. He'd sit with his laptop while I worked, and I'd slip him a free beer when things were slow. We've been friends for years, and the extra company made me feel safe. Nick was practically part of the coffee shop family. He knew all the employees, all the routines, all the little quirks of the place. We joked that he knew the shop better than half the staff. I never once thought he'd be the person I needed to worry about. Then came one Saturday night in the summer of 2019. I'd already worked 2 overnight shifts without Nick since he was away at a family wedding. By the third night, nobody was around to keep me company. The shop was empty and I was anxious, but I told myself I'd manage. Around 3 in the morning, I was alone at the counter. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a figure passing by the front window. I expected someone to come in through the front or side door, but no one did. The minutes passed, the shop stayed silent. My nerves prickled. I went to fill up the mop bucket in the back. That's when the front door opened. I shouted out, "I'll be right there," and finished with the bucket. But when I returned, the counter was empty. No one was in sight. I checked the bathrooms. The men's room light was on and the door was shut. I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself it was just a late-night customer. I kept mopping. A few minutes later, The door opened and Nick walked out. I felt instant relief. He explained that he had just gotten back from the wedding and thought he'd surprise me. I was glad he came, and I told him he could have whatever he wanted on the house. I went behind the counter, loaded the espresso machine, and turned to make a joke. But Nick wasn't smiling like a friend anymore. His face twisted into something darker, devilish. The look in his eyes made my skin crawl. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice trembled. Nick grinned, pulled a knife from behind his back, and said something that froze my blood. "I'm finally going to have the barista." He laughed as he moved closer. I tried to reason with him, reminding him we were friends, pointing toward the cameras. He barked back that the cameras were just for show. They'd never worked. How did I not know that? He locked the doors, flipped the sign to closed, and kept pushing me toward the back of the shop. Panic surged through me. My eyes darted around, searching for something, anything. The floor was wet from the mop, and I could feel myself slipping as I backpedaled. Nick screamed at me, his voice twisting with anger. "You should have given me this months ago. Do you know how much time I wasted on you?" I was nearly cornered when I saw the panini press on the sandwich counter. With all the strength I had, I grabbed it and swung. The corner of the heavy metal hit the side of his head. He slashed at me in the process, slicing my arm open, but the hit combined with the wet floor sent him crashing down. I didn't stop to think. I vaulted the counter, bolted out the back door, and ran to my car. I locked myself inside and called 911. That's when I realized he had parked his car directly in front of mine, blocking me in. Moments later, Nick came out of the shop and tried to break into my car. He yanked on the handles, slammed his fist against the glass, but he couldn't get inside. After minutes of terrifying struggle, he gave up and sped away in his car. The police arrived soon after. I was treated for my injury and gave them my full statement. Every detail. And as it turned out, Nick was right. The cameras had never worked. But the officers still believed me. Nobody doubted what he tried to do. Nick was arrested and bailed out, and then he vanished. He disappeared completely. No one has seen or heard from him since. The coffee shop no longer stays open overnight. People assume I quit because of what happened, but I didn't. I kept working there until only a few months ago. What happened with Nick still lingers in my mind. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see that grin and the knife in his hand.